Irish, so I'm Creole. I'm mixed, just as the islands are. And growing up as a child, family was, I would say, what I was more of anything. I knew I was an Andrade. I knew there was a huge sense of pride in the family. Just in the family. Sundays, our tradition was to wake up in the morning, have to get dressed, put dress clothes on, which I hated, and go to church. Oftentimes I was in church, and like my daughter who's in the audience, I would often have my Star Wars figures in church getting in trouble. But after church, we would always visit family. And my great-grandmother's house was, as some of my older relatives used to mention, Command Central. It was where everyone came together. We'd oftentimes doing grease and eggs in the morning, and then in the afternoon she'd be cooking. The women would be in the kitchen, the guys would be joking, making fun of each other, and us kids would have full room. So we grew up with a lot of presence of family and some traditions that I didn't even realize that were getting into me till later. I really developed a lot more of an understanding of Cape Verdean culture going to college. Going to UMass Dartmouth, I was blessed with the opportunity to, growing up in East Providence, a lot of people were Cape Verdean, like me, being third generation, and the unfortunate reality is that coming to America, you're forced to basically assimilate. And I remember my grandmother telling me stories about living in Providence, Rhode Island, and going to school and being beaten for speaking Creole. So literally, to have success for our families, we've taught our children to assimilate into the cultures that we've moved to. And we've done that quite successfully, but to some degree, we lose some essence of who we are when we lose our cultural identity for the sake of fitting in. Going to college at UMass Dartmouth, I was blessed with the opportunity to be around a lot of students that were first generation or recent immigrants, and learned a lot about the difference, because these years of growing up here has created a different reality for those that are living here than living in the island. And had never been to the island, but got very involved in the Cape Verdean Students Association at UMass Dartmouth. It had been dead for a number of years, and me and some of my fellow students helped to revitalize it, and we did a lot of organizing. And through that experience, in 2003, after graduating, I graduated in 2001 with a degree in computer science, I had an opportunity. The Cape Verdean Students Association was going to Cape Verde. We had done a lot of fundraising, and I had friends that always told me I needed to go to Cape Verde. I've been working in New Bedford. Instead of going to computer science, I started working with the community. And basically what happened for me is through poetry, through poetry, I found my inner connection to my spirit. So there was a point in time in my life where I feel I was lost. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I was at and why I was existing. And through hip-hop music, I found a voice for myself, and through writing poetry, I found a connection to a higher power. And coming back to New Bedford, Massachusetts from finding that and looking around and seeing young people that didn't know who they were and seeing the conditions that young people were in, I decided to work in a nonprofit. And in that experience in New Bedford, Massachusetts, in Boston, in Providence, looking around at the community, there was a lot of violence going on, and there was a lot of hopelessness that I was seeing in young people. And in trying to address that, I thought that poverty was the reason that happened. Because I would look at communities, I had opportunities to live in different communities. I lived in Rehoboth for a period of time. I lived in Boston, going to UMass Dartmouth, seeing that the realities that young people face in these communities is different from the reality that the people in Brockton or Pawtucket or Olneyville were experiencing. And what I thought was that poverty was the cause of that situation. And I started doing a lot of community work, bringing people together through poetry, organizing open mics, getting young people together, and doing workshops around social conditions. And one of the things I identified was that poverty was a cause of violence. However, I was blessed. Someone I had mentioned before invited me to go with the Cape Verdean Students Association to Cape Verde in 2003 to do AIDS awareness, HIV prevention work, and also to talk with young leaders in Cape Verde. And going out there, the first island we went to was the island of Fogo, and we spent 2 weeks there. And when I got there, I had an experience, I would say it was a nirvana experience. The first day there, we landed. The flight was scary as hell. The small little plane landed on in the middle of the ocean, this volcano island. And getting off the plane, my soul felt such a crazy feeling. Being that my grandparents were born here and had never been there, but there's something that I felt like was intrinsically in me. I was never born in Fox Point, but when I think of where my family's from, I say Fox Point, because there was such a pride in that, but also in Cape Verde, in these islands that they had never touched the ground in. They felt a part of it. And to go back there 3 generations later and land on that island, and then to put our bags in the room and then witness everybody going to the beach at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we're going to the beach and I'm like, everybody's coming? And I'm looking around and it's young, it's old. And when we go to the beach, we used to go to the beach regularly in Newport as a child. When you go to the beach, you set your area up and you stay in your area. Your area is your area. You may make eye contact with people, but if you do, you may say hi. They might look at you like you're crazy if you say hi. But in Cape Verde, the reality is that it wasn't like that. There was young people, old people, there was no boundaries. And everybody was kind of intermingled together. You saw adults playing soccer, kids playing, young couples flirting with each other, married couples, children, and it was all interweaving as a community. And looking at it and looking around and seeing the faces I saw growing up in East Providence, or the faces I see in New Bedford with smiles and peace, I saw something that I haven't seen in America. You know what I mean? Like you see it at your family cookouts or your family things, but to see a whole community coming forward like that. And to travel around on that island and go into especially the villages, no running water. You have to have the bucket to take a shower with the cup, and electricity on and off, and children asking for money, not for Jordans or for an iPad or an iPhone, but to go to school, to get pencils. But also people that will come and give you a plate of food that clearly have less than I have, that will feed you their last meal before they will feed themselves, that are giving. And not just giving in terms of material things, but the eye contact that people look at you with. And to be over in those islands and see that reality was such a powerful experience for me, and it made me have a realization that the issues that we have here are cultural. It's not just poverty, because there's people that have less than we have here in our inner cities. I don't care where you live, what project you live in, you have running water, you have heat, you have all these excesses. And to see a land where there was less, but there was so much more. And as was mentioned, art and I believe that poetry exists not just in words, but in the way people interact with each other. And throughout Cape Verde, the way people communicate with each other, the way they express themselves. You may see some people that look like they're angry at each other. It looks like in the States it'd be a conflict, and you're waiting for something to jump off, and then 2 minutes later they're laughing and joking. But they're going to express exactly what they feel. If I feel a certain way about something he said, they're going to let you know. And the way the expression of the people is very, very expressive culture. Poetry is a powerful tool. Poetry is what led Martin Luther King here to have I Have a Dream speech. Many years before he gave that speech, he carried around a poem from Langston Hughes. It's a poem called Harlem, where he talks about a deferred dream. When you look at Cape Verdean culture, and in particular independence, a lot of that independence movement was pushed by poets, by poetry that challenged the reality that was existing in Cape Verde. You're talking about a colony that had a lot of destitution in terms of the lack of water, drought, and you have conditions that were imposed on them by our colonial power. And much like in the United States, poetry led people to change the way they think. It was poets that came out and had a voice to give identity to even write in the language. Because one of the first things we lose sometimes is our language. One of the first things that was lost I'm a third generation, but there's things that were still within me, even though I was not born in the islands, and even though I was not raised in a family that spoke the language, there was still elements of that reality within my upbringing. But the first thing that goes is your language. And one of the things that was a very revolutionary act, or act of self-expression, was through the poets. Some of the poets refusing to write in Portuguese, but choosing to write in Creole. For myself, I do not know the language of Creole. Fala Creole, but I fala pouco. Like, I only can speak a little bit, but I have to force myself to learn that, because I feel like it's a necessity to connect with the land of my ancestors, and to also connect with the people that exist in the islands today, because for me, I felt heaven in Cape Verde more than I felt it anywhere else in the world.